The Israel-Hamas conflict has thrown the world economy into new uncertainty. Amid a tumultuous week, the International Monetary Fund has published its new economic outlook. Here's what IMF Director Kristalina Georgieva had to say about the economic impact of the fighting.
It is too early to say. We have seen some up and down of oil prices. We have seen some reaction on markets. And as I said, we will be closely monitoring this. Very, very clearly, this is a new cloud on not the sunniest horizon for the world economy.
The IMF also revised its growth forecast for the world's two biggest economies, the United States and China. For the United States, it raised its projections for economic growth to 2.1%, up 0.3 percentage points from its previous forecast. China, on the other hand, is expected to grow less than previously expected. 5%. That's 0.2 percentage points less growth than the IMF announced in July. Joining me now is Anna Rathbun. She's Chief Investment Officer at CBIZ Investment Advisory Services. Thank you for joining us, Anna. Anna, IMF Chief Georgieva says a new cloud on the horizon. How big a cloud do you think this is?
Well, nice to join you, Marie. I think this is, there are a few implications here, and that's partly specific to the region in terms of uncertainty in the cloud, and partly war in general. She did make a comment about oil prices going up and down and closely monitoring the situation, and I think that reflects the uncertainty about a potential contagion of this conflict into a regional war, and that could definitely potentially have impact on the production of crude. But in general, war is by nature inflationary. So in a world where we've already seen inflationary pressures, and we've also seen central banks reacting to those inflationary pressures, this may prove to be another challenge that's on the horizon. And remember, this is the second war that we're seeing in a year and a half. And the whole world is watching, and there may be some pressure in different countries to determine who their allies truly are. And when the world is divided, it is not good for fostering global economic growth.
Right. So, and if we look at the forecast of the IMF, it's becoming more optimistic on U.S. economic growth. Does that surprise you?
It does not. So what the IMF is doing, it's October, it's almost the end of 2023. So they're making their final revisions. Most of the year is behind us. 2023 is more visible than it was in July. So U.S. economy has been outperforming expectations all year long. And it seems like IMF is now acknowledging that. The lower expectation at the beginning was due to the worries about a recession based on weakness in manufacturing and tech sectors. And remember the banking turmoil back in March, it had everybody worried, as well as the rapidly rising interest rates. But Americans, it seems, had a lot in savings that Americans could use during this difficult time. So 2023 might be looking better. There are questions about 2024.
Right. So looking at 2024, what are the biggest economic risks facing the U.S. right now?
So we're looking at consumers. So about 70% of the U.S. economy is driven by American consumers. And if you take a look at the American consumers, cash flow isn't looking that great, right? So the savings that I mentioned earlier, we're running out of it. Student loan payments are starting again in October, and that is a huge issue here in the United States. And of course, CPI came in this morning, our inflation measure for consumers this morning, and it's still running hot. And on top of that, it's really food and energy prices are driving it. And those are essentials to sustain human life. So even if economic growth may look good from the top level like the IMF, the question really is, are Americans really thriving under those, the 2.1, 2.2 growth rate expectations, or are they struggling? And if there's another challenge coming at us, will be able to withstand it? That is the big question.
Right. So even though the IMF is looking more optimistic here, consumers won't necessarily, or people in the US won't necessarily feel that, right?
Right, exactly. The CPI came in, it is high, but, it's definitely been falling. You're not buying everything that is inside the makeup of the CPI at that proportion, right? Most people are spending money on energy and food. And when those prices go up, what the numbers say is very different from how it actually feels.
Right. China's growth outlook, as opposed to the US, was revised down. Is that coming as a surprise?
No, this is also not coming as a surprise. So a lot of the excitement from the previous estimates were over the reopening of the Chinese economy from the COVID-19 lockdowns. So previous expectations may have been too high because the IMF, as well as the markets here in the United States, we had expected consumption from the Chinese people, Chinese consumers, to take off. Even just a few months ago, we were expecting them to make up for some of that growth and to drive that. But what we have found is that retail sales have been muted, and even tourism and spending during a holiday week like the Golden Week was a huge disappointment. So it's a few things, two reminders, huge reminders. One, consumption, it is not what drives the Chinese economy. So maybe we were too optimistic about that reopening. And the other is the main driver of Chinese GDP really has been real estate development and infrastructure development. And we know there are problems there, right? So their debt levels are very, very high. And because of the negative impact of those developers, the property investment remains muted. And so just because you've reopened the economy, the issues that existed before have not disappeared. So in some ways, this is not a surprise at all.
Anna Rathbun, thank you so much for your insights.
Thank you.